Now, enough of the housekeeping items. I'd like to introduce our presenter today. It's my colleague, Douglas Kelly. Many of you have probably been on his webinars before, but for those of you who don't know him, Douglas is our head of legal editorial at EverFi. He's a licensed attorney and is passionate about organizational culture, ethical decision-making, anti-corruption, and also data security. Obviously, Douglas has an approach under the corporate compliance angles to all these issues. These are also all topics on which Douglas writes regularly on our blog that I encourage you to go visit. It's blog.lawroom.com. And now, without further ado, I'd say, Douglas, I'd like to kick it off to you so you can get us started on today's topic. Per the webinar title, From Paper to Action, how do you use a code of conduct effectively at your organization? So Douglas, what do we mean by that?
Great. Thank you, Michele. Good morning, folks. We do a lot of research on compliance and ethics here, both for our products and for thought leadership. So I'm really excited to share our findings with you. Just a heads up, this presentation is based on a white paper my colleague, Karen Peterson, developed. The white paper goes into much more detail and cites all the research we've done. So stay tuned as we give you the details on how to get that white paper. This presentation is going to be a little more broad strokes, but I've tried to include some actionable tools that you can take away immediately after the webinar. Agenda. Today we're going over three main topics. First, how to develop a code of conduct, or if you already have one, how to improve it. Second, how to make it effective. And finally, we will go over ways to measure the impact of your compliance efforts. Why are we talking today? So in my experience, it's very common for companies to write a code of conduct and just let it sit in their workplace policies, expecting people to follow and identify with it. And I think that's a natural expectation. However, research shows that this is ineffective, and in fact, it can weaken compliance. So as an illustration, let's talk about United for a bit. We have all heard of the scandal that erupted when United forcefully ejected a passenger from a flight, and a lot has been said about that. But what I find most interesting for you folks is the role of United's code of business conduct in all of this. After the scandal, United performed an evaluation and found one main source of the problem. Their policies got in the way of their values, and procedures interfered in what's doing right. This reflects a common paradigm. Company values not matching company policy, and procedures, what's happening on a daily basis, was not reflecting doing the right thing, also known as integrity. United's code of conduct was also subject to an SEC prosecution. Basically, the SEC fined United for senior members failing to follow anti-corruption and anti-bribery procedures contained in their code of business conduct. And they weren't monitoring employees who allegedly accepted bribes from a public figure. The transaction violated securities laws, but the SEC made a really big point about the company not following its own policy. So I use this. I don't like picking on United, and in fact, I don't like picking on one single company. Really great companies can make mistakes. But I think the lesson here is that a code of conduct should be taken very seriously, and it simply can't sit in a PDF. This is one of the many reasons why it's important to maximize your code of conduct, and that's why we're here today. First section, development and improvement. Let's go over the legal stuff. Companies can put whatever they want in a code of conduct as long as it doesn't violate the law, like discrimination laws. That's the easy part. The hard part is putting in the good stuff. The Department of Justice and the U.S. Sentencing Commission released its evaluation of corporate compliance programs in March of 2017. And I think it provides good guidance on what makes effective ethics and compliance programs, and it includes discussion about policies. I listen to them because they've been enforcing compliance programs for decades, as a lot of you well know. Some things to think about your code of conduct that's found in this evaluation. Were you intentional in designing your code of conduct, or was it scrapped together? Did you involve other departments and business units to give input before releasing a code of conduct? Is the language clear and concise so that all employees can read it? And then finally, does it include a sophisticated process for raising complaints where employees don't feel they could be retaliated against? I recommend using the evaluation as a way to start reviewing your policies And so you can Google that topic and you can find it. And I would recommend auditing your policies in that way. What needs to improve? With all in good endeavors, doing an audit is great, but you need to do more. You can put all the great language in the world in your code of conduct, but you really want it to resonate with employees in your company and really with customers. And you do that with values. That's where it all starts. So this is a very oversimplified graph, but I think it sets out the next step in code of conduct is really working with the mission statement. All companies have one. Pull out values that represent very human attitudes that draw from that mission. Provide guiding principles or responsibilities, what people need to do about those values. And then finally is how that's reflected in norms, both formal, such as who to report to if there's an ethical violation, and informal, how employees keep each other accountable, if at all. You know, often informal is like the water cooler talk. How are people really working with each other on the ground? And so all of that needs to be reflected in a code of conduct, particularly values. And the reason I say this is when we talk about ethical companies, the definition of ethics is really adhering to a central standard and what defines that standard. And that's going to be your company's mission and your company's values. And so that's why it's so important. But not all standards are good and not all values are good. So another case study, a study was done to explore what led to Lehman Brothers' downfall after it had engaged in widespread fraud before the financial crisis. So one of the things they found was, again, the impact of their code of conduct and values on the company's ethical culture. They found that the code language was fine, actually, and it told people at a minimum what to do and what not to do and how not to violate the law. Its failure, however, was not promoting ethical values or Lehman's adherence to higher ethical values than, say, making money or following the law. And on top of that, one of their values was compete aggressively in furthering the interests of the firm. I mean, this was in their code. And so I am not surprised at all with language like that companies thought it was okay to engage in unethical behavior. So in addition to using your values as a driver for your code of conduct, you need to think hard about if those values are good in of themselves. And this case study exemplifies that. So that last piece is critical. And I think it's because society, especially millennials, are expecting companies to sort of go beyond their code and go beyond profits and really reflect values, something we can all aspire to and identify with. And so that's why it's important to develop a code of conduct in this way. First takeaway, I would say, of the presentation is reevaluate. This is a time to think. An hour meeting with department heads is a great start, but it's probably not going to cut it. You need to look at your code. You need to look at outside resources. You need to think about your values and your people and identify patterns and incorporate that in your code of conduct. Implementation. So in other words, how do you make your code come alive and work for you? How do you get it out of the policy and reflect it among your company? First is operations. The first way to implement is to make sure it's reflected in every part of your business, from recruitment to long-term strategy to customer service. Some of you might say, well, duh, but remember that words on paper are often forgotten in real practice. United was a sophisticated company, but nonetheless, there is a gap in action in what was on paper. And a lot of companies just don't think about these things, and that's fine. Values are your most important tool here, though, and because they're going to be general enough to apply to all these different business units. And if you did your homework, they're going to be intrinsic to the core of your business. So you're going to have all these divisions reflecting values that are reflected in your code of conduct, right? It's this unifying force. And so how do you do this? It's very lofty ideal, and I must admit, it won't happen overnight. But I think start with managers. They have a considerable influence over their direct reports and how people operate. And so maybe switching up your approach. Like if you're a professional who wants to update your code of conduct and you wanting to get input about from these different business units about how they conduct their work or how things happen on a daily basis, I would suggest instead of saying I'm updating our code of conduct, right, I might switch it up and say, I need your help. I want to make the company better and I need your help. Can you give me your time to talk about how values are incorporated in your daily business or what you need from the compliance department? So that's one is operations. Values need to be reflected in everything the company does. Second, culture. This should come to no surprise to anybody, and everybody has something to say about culture, EverFi included. Still, I think it bears mentioning because culture is that intangible what that guides behavior. Again, values found in your code of conduct should be front and center, and consequently, your culture. We've developed a lot of research on this and done a webinar on the topic, so I'm not actually going to go into detail on these. If you're interested, when you get the slides, please feel free to click the link below when Michele sends you the slides, and you can find out what we really mean by, tone from the top and training and daily actions, and how you can use those to build a better culture. Building a better culture sort of forms like a foundation. Think of it as a foundation to really make your code of conduct come alive. And then finally, training. Training is the best vehicle to communicate things like values and ethics and behavior. I have to say an email is simply not going to cut it. It's easy, but it's not going to be enough because there's no real knowledge transfer. It doesn't hit the correct part of the brain, and it doesn't seem to resonate with people when you're truly trying to educate and transform an environment. So here's what the research says, something we tend to use exclusively when developing our product. So I'd like to share the research with you. And again, we've developed a white paper. And so if you click on the link below, you can find out all the research that backs up these assertions. First, I'm going to quickly go through these. First is tone. Tone is really important with adult audiences. You can't speak to them like they're children. Often with an email, right, it can come off that way. You need to do this. And there isn't a lot of feedback. There's no feedback mechanism for people to truly understand what you're trying to say. Second, training needs to give adults real skills. So research shows that when you are expecting an adult learner to learn something, they want to be able to take it and immediately apply it to their jobs and what they know. So they need to contextualize what they learn immediately. Third is engagement. Does training activate sense making and meaning making, and do case studies allow the learner to explore concepts? This is critical for truly learning and embedding new concepts into the brain. And I'll have to say, slapping a video on the screen is not engagement, right? Certainly it's better than reading something on a page, but engagement does not necessarily mean learning. And then finally, reinforcement. Training needs to be reinforced. Once is not enough. It should be ongoing, but not repetitive. And that's a big ask. I understand that a lot of you have in-house training programs, and that's good. And I think whatever type of training you roll out in any form, it'd be a good idea to follow sort of all these concepts. It's going to maximize how people learn and follow in things like your code of conduct. So it's good to be creative. Another case study for you folks. And this time it's a positive story about a company doing it right for once. And it reinforces all the implementation things I've talked about. So let's dig in a little. Microsoft recently ran a campaign called Microsoft Runs on Trust. And they do it to ensure employees are understanding their fundamental values that are guiding their decisions on an everyday basis, and also empower them to make the right choices for themselves, for the company, and for society. But how do they do this? And so Ethisphere wrote up a case study on them, again, resource below, and I recommend you read through it. What I thought was interesting, I pulled out a few tidbits, was like they eliminated 90% of their policies. They took 90% of the language out. and they instead replaced it with values and really general guiding principles, because they know that employees are all different. They come from different backgrounds. They're going to face situations that are going to vary from time to time. And so they're able to be flexible in what they expect of their employees. So that was interesting. Second is values are reflected in all aspects of their business. It's not just the compliance issue, it's marketing and communications and hiring. And I have to say their CEO is often making public comments about how important it is to be compliant and ethical. And that really helps. That really helps drive values for a company. Third is management training. So they've also designed training programs geared particularly towards middle managers because they want to encourage these managers to talk about ethics and compliance so they can educate their teams. And the research really supports this. Time and time again, studies have shown that managers set the example for the people that work under them. If they believe it's okay to violate the code of conduct, or they do so inherently, employees, in effect, are not going to take it seriously as well. And it's a really dangerous proposition when there's a breakdown in your code and you, as HR or in-house counsel, can't see that, right? You're not on the ground to see these daily micro activities that slowly denigrate your code of conduct and your values. And so training managers is a way to help that. It's more scalable than training all employees, which we also advocate as a company. But that's what they did, is train managers. And then finally is transparency. What I like is Microsoft is being really open about it. Ask any member of their compliance team, and they're going to tell you that their work isn't done and nothing is perfect. And your program isn't going to be perfect. And that's okay, because there's a lot of information and concepts to work with. But hopefully it provided you some ways to make it better as far as implementation. So the second takeaway I'd say is it starts with you. Implementation is not easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. Operationalizing values by working with different department heads, building a great culture, and training are practical ways to lift that code of conduct off the ground. All are guided by company values. Finally, measurement. Measurement's extremely important, both to benchmark progress you're making as an ethics and compliance professional and human resources. But it's also a way to communicate to other stakeholders, particularly the CEO and board members, who may not fully appreciate everything you do for the company, or they might ask, where are we on that? Or it's a simple way to communicate. So how do we do that? First, a climate survey. The most direct way to measure your code of conduct is asking about it. The vast majority of academic studies out there use surveys to pull data. And so this makes sense because ethics and values are inherently qualitative. We want to be able to chalk them up into numbers and use statistics, but on its base level, asking people about what they believe is the way to get you good input. So what's a climate survey? It's something you send out to gauge where employees are and what they think about the workplace. It can be really broad, and it seems really simple to just send out a Google form and survey people, but it's really quite powerful. Knowing how you can ask how your employees feel about your code of conduct, or if their company's values are reflected in their daily activities. They can respond about how they feel about their management following the code of conduct. But the question a lot of you are going to have is really how. Again, well, how do you develop a climate survey? And immediately, it's murky. It's easy to craft questions. You and I can do that quite easily. But we have to be careful because the data may not be the most accurate. People go to school for this type of thing, developing surveys. And so if I were to give any quick recommendation, especially if you don't have a research team or PhD handy, which a lot of us do not, first is an HBR study did on Google back in 2012. So what Google did was it surveyed its employees to get their impressions on management because there's a high attrition rate happening. And it was effective in the end. It really did help. So this can give you insights when you click on the link, particularly because, again, managers were so critical to compliance in that respect, and it really improved a problem that they found. Second, Ethisphere released a white paper called Early Insights. Ethisphere is a clearinghouse that lists companies that it believes are ethicals after a comprehensive vetting process, and it uses values quite prolifically as well. But what I like about the Early Insights is it talks about surveys and it talks about data and it talks about measurement. And it shows that 77% of the companies that are most ethical are conducting climate surveys. So it's going to give you a little more data points on how you personally can do this, even if you don't have a PhD background. And I say, give it a shot. Experts should be crafting these for you, but I think this data is way too important not to get involved if you're really strapped for resources. These climate surveys are going to be really helpful in the end. Triangulation. So there are additional data points that you can use to validate your survey data. And so here's some other ways to get that. You can do an internal audit where instead of asking about people's beliefs, you're actually looking about their actions and how they or do not meet the code of conduct that you've established, or how they do or do not meet values. Second is hotline data. A lot of companies have hotlines, and some companies will only really look for the legal red flags, like did they allege sexual harassment? Is this a bribery situation? But I think all of that data should be evaluated because it's going to help you identify where there might be potential conflicts. And it's also going to help you to see if the code of conduct is being violated. Again, it's not illegal, but it can lead to problems if people don't take it seriously. And then finally, training. Measuring how and what people learn is a valuable data point. Subject completed, pre and post assessments. Technology as a platform allows you to do that on a large scale instantaneously. It's sort of that benefit versus in-person training if you have multiple offices or you have global reach. And then finally, follow up. After you collect the data, you need to know what to do with it. Here's my recommendations. One, use it to identify risks. It's okay if the data shows that maybe not all people know what your company's values are. That's great because that gives you a place to start. And there's something objective about data that makes it easier to see these issues, and people take it less personally when you're using a data point reflecting employee values about what's not working. Second is benchmarking. Document results and use those as a base to compare them. So for example, if you roll out training, sending a follow-up survey about the same topics and see if anything has changed from the first time you sent out a survey, right? If things change good, it's likely that you can chalk it up to training. You have to control for other data points, but it's a good start. But I mean, if nothing changes, well, then you know to switch up your approach. Finally, reporting. Data is a great way to communicate what you're doing to other people. It can be really pretty heavy though and qualitative. So my recommendation is if you're going to be reporting to your CEO or the board, really find a designer in-house. And if you don't have one, get one out-house to really graphically represent the information. It's just going to be so much easier to communicate the really complex stuff you're doing in an easy way for people that may or may not be as educated as you are. Third and final takeaway for us all. I think this is definitely possible. Again, this isn't something that you can fall into. Not everybody is going to be a natural data scientist or PhD who can make programs and perfect surveys and work with perfect data. But if you're smart and you care, which I suspect most of you are, you can figure this out. Be scientific and really try to do it right. You're gonna see some gains, and I guarantee it. Oh, I can't guarantee it, but I'm gonna hope for the best. But I know, I am that positive that it's gonna happen. So finally, the main takeaways for us: be thoughtful about your code of conduct, right, when you develop or improve it. Be strategic in how you use it. Again, it can't sit on a piece of paper. using values and incorporating other departments and developing it is going to be absolutely critical. And then finally, measure it to show the great work you're doing for the company. And so that's it. Thank you for listening. I think before I kick it off to Michele, I'm really curious to know what you think about when tracking data. We as a company are always trying to improve our products, and so I would really love to hear from you. And if you can type in the question box what you would like to know about your company, what data points are really important to you when you go out about your compliance program. It allows us to build our products and data capabilities as a company. So I would appreciate that, but no rush or no requirement to do so. We just want to be able to better serve the market. And I think that's it, Michele.
Yeah, thanks, Douglas. That was truly an outstanding presentation. I guess folks can recognize from the title, we were trying to provide you this time with something very practical that could give you some powerful takeaways on how you would go about doing this in the real world. Already we're talking about code of conduct, right? So it's easy to become high level and theoretical, but like what we really wanted here was for you to see the translation between the program and the programmatic effort and the actual implementation, actually making these things come to life so they do actually have an impact on your workplace every day. So hopefully we've done that. I want to reinforce, because I received a couple of questions that came in. The slides and the recording will be made available to everybody on the call today. You will receive your own copy of the slide deck, where there will also be links to all of the resources that Douglas cited. So I think that will be very valuable for you. I'd like to remind that we're pretty much at the end of our 30 minutes here. So for those of you who are switching off right now, there will be a survey poll that initiates. That's how we collect your feedback. Only 2 to 3 minutes to complete that one in. So if you could do that, we would review your answers closely. And now I think we are ready for some questions. For those of you who are still on the line, I would like to ask some. I think some are coming in as we are speaking. We'll give a little more time for you to put them in. If Douglas, there's one here. Do you want me to read it out?
Sure.
See if we can answer it.
Yeah.
So what are some effective ways of getting feedback from staff about the effectiveness of training on compliance and ethics other than surveys?
Yeah, that's a great question. Primarily, it's going to be surveys. I think the other data points I've talked about, well, you can catalog. So there's surveys, and then you can look at what skills have been developed. And so in a way, some people will evaluate this with questions or quizzes, right, to see if there's comprehension involved. And there's good ways and bad ways to do this. But anyway, you can evaluate the actual skills that have been learned. For example, a lot of code of conducts have anti-bribery and anti-corruption policies. And so knowing, if they know like 5 red flags that indicate that something unethical is going on, that'd be a good way to judge after the training, maybe before, ask the question, and then after, if that's helpful. And then please feel free, whoever asked the question, to ask a follow-up on that. I'd be happy to answer it if I didn't answer that fully.
And we have another good one here that I think you'll have fun answering, because it's a tough one, but it's one that we deal with every day.
Okay.
So how do you encourage employees to raise issues early?
Yeah.
Without fear of retaliation or being branded trouble?
Yep, that's an excellent question. And as my practice as an attorney, I mean, I think that was the #1 thing people were afraid of, is they didn't feel comfortable reporting their manager or reporting something that was going on. And to that effect, culture has a big part of it. If you can, there's this sense of trust in what you're going to do. So code of conduct, you need to absolutely have a procedure And I can't give legal advice, by the way, it's unethical for me to do so. But in a code of conduct, there needs to be a very established procedure and multiple ways for somebody to complain about something. It cannot be just to the manager or maybe to some VP of HR they have never met. There needs to be multiple avenues. Second is research has shown that people are really hesitant to report their managers. And so as long as you have a way for them to report about their managers to somebody, that's important. It's honestly, it's very tough. What I can do is develop more research on this. People are going to say it depends on a culture. There's this concept of legitimacy in the compliance research that shows, do people believe what you're going to do? So I guess a way is in ensuring adherence to sort of any of your policies. Like if you wrote it down in the code of conduct, no matter what it is, even if it has nothing to do with reporting, let's say it's a billing practice, make sure that that's being followed, because if people can see that even everything in the company is being followed correctly and people are being held accountable to it and rewarded for following company conduct and being punished if they don't, that lets them know, hey, whatever's written is a safe process for me. This company really does mean what it says. So that is a very long-winded answer of saying, make sure the code is enforced in every single detail.
Yeah, and Douglas, if I can add my 2 cents on this, obviously I haven't done your level of research, but I am very much in tune with what's been happening in the media, from the news stories that we read. And I'm not going to nominate anybody here, but we all know who we're talking about. There's been a few pretty major compliance meltdowns and sort of like employees relationship management meltdowns in companies that are in the public eye. And when you go and dissect and kind of like trying to look very into that, what really happened, most of the times we find like a common pattern where either there weren't effective procedures for reporting, meaning that they weren't anonymous enough, or they didn't afford the employees enough confidence that they could go in and report and face no retaliation or not be singled out by the company. And the other aspect is that or the procedures were not in place at all, right? Or they weren't being followed through at all. So that would be my sort of like observation from what we've seen happen. And I would like to mention too that our blog series, our blog, theblog.larum.com, has several articles specifically about whistleblowers.
Yep.
That are very interesting. If this is a topic that you are particularly interested in, and I'm talking to the person who asked the question, of course, then I encourage you to go and read. There is some very good stuff there that can give you a lot of perspectives. But
I agree. And then again, looking to managers, right? They're that sort of like the clincher in making sure that company policies are being followed. They should be absolutely held accountable to that. Yeah, and then go to the blog and you can use the search function to look up whistleblower. And we provide a lot of evidence-based topics and answers to that.
Oh, but a very great question. Thanks for asking that.
Thank you.
I don't see any more questions coming in. We're about 6 minutes after the scheduled time, so we still have a lot of folks on the line. So thank you so much for being with us this far. Thanks for the questions. Hopefully you enjoyed also this little discussion piece at the end of the webinar. And again, you'll be all getting a copy of the slides recording. The survey poll will initiate as you close out today. And again, thanks so much for being with us. Douglas, thank you very much for presenting.
Right. And then as far as the white paper, Michele,
right,
that the presentation is based on, when it's completed.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Can we go ahead and send it out to these folks?
Absolutely. We'll follow up with a white paper as well, where you'll find more detail of all the principles that Douglas baked into the presentation today. So that would give you, a great set of resources that you can refer to to apply to your own world. So thank you very much again, and the webinar is now over. So we'll look forward to be hosting you again on future events, and until then, take care, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.